here. And I just want to kind of be really upfront and honest about something just as we begin. Just get it out of the way, which is to say that I looked in the mirror when I got here and I realized that I have a Shaggy from Scooby-Doo vibe going on today. And I just thought, let's be honest about that versus pretend something otherwise. But we've been in this series, as you can probably tell, called Growing Pains. So if you're new, what I would tell you about growing pains is that we've been exploring this idea that when life invites us into greater levels of growth, into transformation, into change and evolution, that there is always some level of discomfort. There's something that is disrupting the way that things were. And so perhaps what we've been doing throughout this series, throughout these different messages, is explore what it would look like to change our relationship to that pain. And so what I want to do for today is just to name something pretty simple that I think communicates this larger arc that we've been on, something that's been bubbling up to the surface for us. And it's really to name the fact that every time we face a growing pain in life, we have a simple choice. There's a question being asked of us. What direction are we going to go? Right? We can either take this growing pain and we can either turn away from it, we can run, we can distract, we can escape, we can avoid, or we can turn towards it. And we could perhaps see that there is something in that pain, in that discomfort, in that challenge that is here to help. That maybe our pain isn't always a problem if we could learn to relate to it in a new way. But there's probably many of us out there, and you might be like me, that when pain comes, when challenge or uncomfortable feelings arise, we tend to want to distract ourselves. And I was thinking about, me and my own chosen distractions, and I found that it actually, it came out to be the 3 S's of distraction, particularly as it relates to me, okay? The first is screens. It's very easy to want to turn to a screen when things get uncomfortable, your phone, television, computer, what have you. The next S that I know I deal with is shopping. Right? And you might be saying, well, Jake, I don't picture you as someone who just runs out to JCPenney anytime things get uncomfortable. I'm not talking about necessarily traditional shopping, but with online shopping, with all of the world at our fingertips, it's very insidious but very easy to become uncomfortable and want to go to Amazon and to say, hey, what purchase can I make that is going to fill that hole and stop that uncomfortability, right? What else do I need? And if you're thinking, that's definitely not me, Jake, well, I would just ask you, how many packages arrive at your doorstep each week? I don't know, maybe just a clue as to whether or not this is you. So we have screens and we have shopping, and then the last one, the third S of distraction that I know I deal with is sugar. I don't think we need to elaborate on that one. Enough said there, right? Well, who likes sugar? All right, then. There was 77% of you were lying today, I guess, apparently. But try life without sugar, and then come back to me, But now there is another S, a fourth, not an F. There is an S, a fourth S that is actually a way that I find myself leaning into distraction, and it's something that I actually find is helpful for me is the sauna, right? And what I like about the sauna is that it's uncomfortable, but I have no distractions. I have to be with the uncomfortable feelings. But it's interesting because at the sauna that I go to, I've found that there are people that bring their cell phone even into the sauna. And I'm sorry, this is me being vulnerable, but I am very judgmental. I look at them and I go, you can't be with yourself for 15 minutes. You need to endanger your electronic device. It's 170 degrees in here. Your phone was not made to withstand that. And then I have a brief moment of compassion and empathy where I say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have a second phone that's devoted to the sauna, right? Quite literally a burner phone. Sorry, I know. That was low-hanging fruit, and I had to go for it. But What I'm painting a picture of is that we have a tendency, right? Maybe just me, but I'd imagine more than just me. We have this tendency to want to move away from challenge, move away from uncomfortable feelings or experiences. What's another way that we do this, right? We sometimes move the uncomfortable experience out further in time, also known as procrastination, right? Anyone here a procrastinator? Okay, a little more honesty there. Now, I recently, within the last year or year and a half, heard a phrase that changed my relationship or the way I thought about procrastination. It was new to me. It's been around a long time, so it could be very much something that you've been saying for years and years. But has anyone ever heard of this phrase, eat the frog? Okay, just a few of you. This is great. Then I get to explain eating the frog to most of you. Exciting. Okay. Okay, I know it's a toad technically, but let's ignore that. Let's ignore that. Eat the toad, whatever. We can. So the idea here, this is purely metaphor because I would never advocate for actually eating a toad, right? They're endangered, beloved creatures in our watershed. So do not actually think about eating a toad. But let's talk purely metaphorically and imagine that someone said, you need to eat this toad by the end of the day today, okay? And again, you're thinking, this is horrible, this is terrible, this is inhumane. But we're again, just for the sake of metaphor, you're going to start thinking practically at a certain point. And there's a couple ways to approach eating the toad. And probably if you're like me, what you're probably going to be inclined to do is you're going to spend a lot of the day thinking about this dreadful task you have to do and considering all the different ways that you might approach it, right? You're like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could swallow it. Maybe I want water. Maybe I want a soda with it. I don't know. Like, what do I need to do? And what you'll probably found is that the whole day has gone by and you've thought over and over and rolled around in your head all these different possibilities and you've just gotten more miserable, more stressed out, and you've tortured yourself and you still have to eat the toad, right? The other option is first thing in the morning, swallow that toad whole, right? Just don't even think about it. Get that thing out of the way. And so the metaphor here, this often comes up a lot in work and in business because people say, look, that thing that you're dreading, that thing on your to-do list that is just, it brings up all this anxiety and stress and frustration for you. I would encourage you to just do it first thing, right? First thing in the morning, make that call, have that meeting, have that uncomfortable conversation. Because either you're going to do it then or you're going to do it later. And if you do it later, you're probably going to have stress and have anxiety about it and overthought it by that later time, right? So, all right, now you can all go around and say, I know what eat the frog means. But I think that this is something that applies to our life in a broader context, that when we have pain, discomfort, things that we know are inside of us that we need to deal with at some point or another, we can move away from it, right? We can put it off, we can procrastinate, and really, the longer that we take, the more we avoid it, the more weight it holds in our mind, in our hearts, right? Or we can approach it and we can turn towards it in the moment. And I think what we're learning throughout this series is that the pain is part of that process of growth. They are intertwined together. So my hope is that today, and really throughout this whole series, that we would consider reevaluating our relationship to uncomfortable things. And it's a simple shift. And it goes like this. When discomfort or challenge comes, and it will come, it's naturally going to arrive in our lives, are we going to turn away, right? Distract, escape, procrastinate, or are we going to lean into it? Are we going to lean into it, turn towards the difficulty, right? As Josh was leading us towards, can we breathe into the difficulty, right? And perhaps have a hope of transmuting and transforming it. Pema Chödrön, a Buddhist meditation teacher, says that rather than trying to rid yourself of your problem, go deeper into it. If you become familiar with fear, compassion arises. So friends, as we talk about our growing pains, maybe we can develop the courage today to go deeper into it, recognizing that where there is pain, there is also truth, love, compassion, maybe a deeper understanding of ourself and the divine. So I want to start with a psychological framework developed by a psychologist named James Hillman. And he had his own way of articulating this idea that maybe we should start looking at the things that are challenging us or are painful for us. And what he said in particular was that we all have symptoms. And now you and I know what a symptom is when it comes to our physical life, right? Like you have a cold, so your symptom might be a runny nose or a cough. But he said, we also have spiritual, mental, emotional symptoms, that even things like anxiety, depression, fear, worry, what have you, these are all symptoms. And the thing about a cold is that you and I know that the cough or the sneeze is not the be-all, end-all. It's actually pointing towards something else happening inside of us. And Hillman said the same is true of our mental, emotional, spiritual symptoms, that our anxiety or whatever it might be for you, it's actually pointing towards something deeper going on in a place that he called the soul. He said it was leading you towards soul. And so his encouragement was, don't just mask or try to cure the symptoms. Follow the path. Follow their lead. Listen to what they're telling you. And in that way, you may have a greater opportunity for deeper healing, right? For a deeper conversation with what's actually happening within you. But if you just simply cure it or mask the pain, you also lose that map towards something deeper within yourself. I'll give you an example, right? Imagine that you have a toothache, and instead of recognizing that perhaps this toothache is telling me that something is wrong with my tooth, imagine you just said, all I possibly care about is just not feeling the pain of this toothache, right? So you take whatever medication you need, and you don't feel the pain, and probably over time you need to take more and more pain medication because it's probably just gonna get louder and hurt worse. But all the way, your tooth may actually be rotting, or something's happening, and it may be poisoning you. And if all you want to do is avoid the symptom, you're never going to find out that deeper truth. And I think we all have these things within us that are crying out to be known. As Hillman said, follow the lead of your symptoms, for there's usually a myth in the mess. And the mess is an expression of soul. What does this mean for us, right? Those of us who, are probably feeling anxiety, fear, worry at the state of the world that we live in, right? And what does it mean for us to follow the lead of our symptoms, realizing that there is a deeper expression of soul that's waiting for us? Because of course, we could turn to distraction, right? The 3 S's of distraction, or whatever it might be for you. Or we could investigate what is going on in my heart, right? Maybe you have anxiety, and maybe if you look at that anxiety, the next layer down, there is fear, right? You can acknowledge, wow, this anxiety is actually covering some fear or some grief or some pain. And perhaps if you could take a look at the fear or the grief, what you would find beneath that is how much you care. I'll put it this way, right? A therapist once told me that wherever you encounter fear, you are also encountering proof that you value yourself. Because if you are afraid of something, it means that that survival mechanism is kicking in, saying, I want to be safe, I want to be protected. And that inherently tells you that you matter to you, right? If you didn't matter to you at all, right? If you had no value for yourself, then if you saw a bear charging over the hill, why would you run, right? Because you don't matter. But the reality is we all on some level matter. We all value ourselves. And it's important to recognize that even something like fear is telling us that. So if we have fear at the state of the world and we fear for the world, may it show us that we also value and care for the world. We value ourselves. We inherently value others. And so we followed this trail from anxiety to fear, and fear to care. And really, care shows us how much love is inside of us. So look at what is possible if we investigate instead of turn away. The same is true of challenges we might face in different relationships of our lives, whether it be friendships, family, partnerships, that we may, and most likely all of us have and will and are facing some sort of conflict or disagreement with some form of a relationship in our lives. And we can either write it off and say, well, that person just doesn't get it, and they're over there, never going to understand me, too bad, right? And another way of saying, I'm just going to ignore the symptom here. Or we could explore it. We could ask ourselves, at least on my end of things, what is happening for me here? What is happening for me in this conflict? And now it could be a myriad of things, but I'll give you an example of one that's often the case. We might look at ourselves and we might say, in this situation, I'm just really longing to be understood by this person, and they don't understand me. Anyone have ever felt this way with a family member, a friend, a loved one, right? We're in conflict and you're just saying, I just wish that they would understand me. Well, inherent in that desire, if you pull back the layers there, what you can recognize is that there is a longing for connection, right? If you desire to be understood, you desire to be connected. We don't really long for understanding from strangers, right? Not nearly in the same way that we do from our loved ones, because of how much they matter to us. So even in a moment of conflict, even in a moment where you do not feel understood by someone you love, deep in that reality is a desire for connection, is a love, is a value for that relationship. These are just things that we can only uncover if we turn towards the discomfort rather than away. We all have symptoms. Maybe you can't sleep. Maybe you have a difficult relationship with food or with your own body. Maybe you have challenges in the various relationships in your life or with your family. Maybe your career is a source of difficulty. Maybe money is a source of incredible stress. But friends, if all we are trying to do is fix and mask the pain of these experiences, we may be missing out on a path. Right? A path towards something deeper within ourselves. This is the magic of leaning in. You've probably heard some version of this saying, whatever the thing is that scares you the most, that's the direction you need to go. Right? Anyone heard some version of this? Wherever that charge is for you, right? Whatever is loaded for you holds a lot of maybe challenging energy for you. It also may hold a lot of potential, right? I've heard this from Aldeans in the past, right? There may be people out there that have constantly told you, hey, you need to write a book, right? Your story is so amazing. You need to write a book. And maybe you're out there and you're thinking, anytime someone has told me that, my whole body like freezes up. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, like a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. Now I wonder if you didn't care either way about whether you wrote a book. If you had zero interest in writing a book and you didn't think it was something that you ever really cared if you did or not, you probably wouldn't have an intense reaction every time someone told you to do it, right? Or said, hey, maybe this would be a good thing. So perhaps whatever you're reacting strongly to has at least some information about a direction that you could possibly take, and perhaps the fear is just something worth examining further. Carl Jung said, where your fear is, there is your task. I don't think he was saying that wherever you feel fear, you must do that thing, right? I'm not out here saying like, if you don't like the idea of skydiving, you must skydive tomorrow to be spiritually healthy. No. I do think he was saying that where your fear is, there will be work to do, right? It doesn't mean you need to do the thing, but it means you should take a look. You should examine, you should ask yourself some questions, maybe even some hard questions. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds good and fine, Jake, but how are we actually going to do this? Because here's at least the way I see it. I think that what we're talking about today is one of the hardest things to do about being human. That we are these creatures who have this fear and anxiety and worry, and we have all these difficult things. And if we're actually saying, hey, what we need to do is to look into those very things that we've spent our whole lives being told that we need to run, that we need to escape, that we need to hide. And then we give ourselves every distraction, every tool to hide from those things. And then to stand here and say, hey, we need to actually consider leaning in. And I get this is one of the hardest parts of being human. So what I want to do for a second is just remind you of some allies that we have in this journey, because I don't think we can do it alone. And here's the first ally that we have for leaning into our pain. It's the breath. It's the breath. Here with us every moment. It's been by your side. It's been with you every waking moment of your life. And yet for the vast majority of our lives, we do it without thinking. Right? And yet there's something magical, mysterious, powerful that happens when we actually focus on our breath, when we actually are intentional about it. A couple things happen. The first is, if you're like me, especially when I was a kid, it used to freak me out a lot because I'd be like, wait a second, I thought I wasn't controlling my breathing. Now I'm in control? Wait, do I have to be in control? And then all of a sudden I'd spend 5 minutes like, what if I stop? Anyone else, right? I had this thing, right? So it can be very trippy to think about whether or not you are the one breathing. But if you do focus on your breath, you will find what is often called mindful breathing, intentional breathing. And it can actually be an incredibly powerful way for us to breathe through the difficulties we experience, for us to look within, for us to lean into whatever challenge and difficulty might be coming our way. And so I want to explain a little bit of the biological effects of mindful breathing and why it's an ally. The first is that it just slows down our body's response to whatever's happening. It calms everything down. It does this through activating the parasympathetic nervous system. It quite literally calms our heart down when we start breathing slowly and intentionally. It increases something called interoceptive awareness, which means most of the time when we are reactive to things going on outside of us, we have this heightened sense of awareness for everything that's going on the outside. Right? But when we start to mindfully breathe, we start to become aware of what's going on the inside, the sensations, the feelings of what is happening inside our body, which is so important. And this change in awareness, it quite literally rewires the neural pathways in our brain to be more likely to move towards that kind of awareness versus the reactivity that so many of us are used to, right? And what this does over time is it basically reduces the tendency that we are going to move into avoidance and distraction and escape. And the reality is that avoidance actually has some negative long-term effects, because if we always avoid the feelings, they don't go anywhere, right? We just stuff them down and they carry a weight, right? They quite literally, they hold us down. And so just explained very simply, I had a friend who explained it this way to me, and I found it to be very helpful. He just said, look, the next time that you're feeling something that is hard for you to feel, just take 2 minutes, and instead of finding something else to do, breathe into that feeling. Breathe into it. And what you may notice, if you just give yourself a couple of minutes, is that not only will you feel better, but you're also beginning the process of working with, processing, and even releasing that emotion from your body. Whereas if you just distract yourself, it's not going anywhere. It's going deeper inside. But if you breathe through those difficult things, you are at least moving the needle towards some sort of long-term healing and letting things go. So this, friends, is how the breath can be an ally. Another important ally that I find on this journey, and it's a little more abstract than the breath, but it's an ally. I would call it our inner parts. See, there is a framework of psychology known as internal family systems. We've spoken about it before on this stage, but it might have been a while, and some of you may not have been here. And basically, what internal family systems does is it takes a look at you and me, and it says deep inside of you, there's not just you, but there's also these various parts of you that show up. Perhaps in anxiety, there's a part of you that's longing to be heard. Perhaps when we cope with things like anxiety, there's another part that says, well, here's how we feel better. And so there's all these different aspects of us showing up inside our own conscious and unconscious experience that are parts of us. And perhaps you're like, this doesn't resonate, this doesn't make sense. But how many of us know that in different experiences of life, different parts of you kind of show up in different moments, right? You're like, whoa, I don't know where that came from. I was thinking about it like, this week I'm going to be getting on a plane at some point, and I promise you this: the Jake that is standing before you right now is very different than the Jake that's going to be in line, right, to get on the plane, right? That's just the reality, because this is the thing with parts, right? Different aspects of ourselves show up in different situations, right? In moments of fear, in moments where we're looking to cope. I'll give you an example, right? I sometimes I will have trouble sleeping, and then in those moments, all of a sudden, this huge explosion of anxiety shows up that is very unlike the kind of anxiety that I might face during the day. And it's all of a sudden, it's saying things to me like, what if you don't fall asleep tonight, you might die. Like you may, if you do not, this is literally what that voice says. It's like if you do not sleep tonight, you may not sleep for the rest of your life. Like you need to fall asleep right now, or else tomorrow is going to be the worst day of your life. Now, what's interesting is I started to do some work on this and just ask myself, what part is showing up here? And very quickly, I recognized that there was a 7-year-old Jake in there who had also had trouble sleeping and who didn't really have someone who was explaining to him, like, it's okay. Right? You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to be the one to solve all of these problems in this moment. Right? You don't need to just cure this. You can relax. It's okay. And so what happens is there's this part that develops that says, if I don't send these crazy warning signals to Jake every time something promises to go wrong, we're not going to be okay, all of us, right? And so what happens is this part develops, it grows, and it becomes the dominant voice in moments of anxiety. And what I have come to realize is that, again, as Hillman reminds us, to cure this experience, right, to cure this little anxious 7-year-old Jake, to try to mute his voice and pretend he doesn't exist and throw him to the corners, would be to miss out on all this beautiful information of a deeper healing that I could experience, right? The motto of internal family systems is that there are no bad parts, that even the parts that are acting out or are acting on, in maybe immature ways, they're actually there to try to help you, right? Even that anxious part of me just wants me to get a good night's sleep. It's just doing it in a very immature way. And so my encouragement for you, friends, is even if you don't do a deep dive into this internal family systems, that at the very least you would start to wonder if maybe when I feel difficult emotions, maybe there is a part of me that has something to say about this emotion. Maybe there is a dotted line that I can trace from this emotion to emotions that I experienced in childhood that I wasn't told that it was okay to experience, or otherwise I didn't have the tools, the resources to process through them. So may we see these inner parts as an ally. And the third ally, friends, for this journey of leaning into our challenges, the third ally is the triggers themselves, the very things that trigger us into these difficult emotions. Now I will just stop and I will say that there are some people out there in the world that have a problem with this word trigger, that they feel that it is a word made up by people who are overly sensitive to have an excuse for being sensitive about things. And I think this is so interesting because people who have an issue with the word trigger are being triggered by the word trigger. But I believe that if you have a pulse, that you are going to have triggers in this life. A trigger is another word for a sore spot, right? Something that you might experience in the world that launches you into fight, flight, and freeze, that holds that extra charge for you. I'll give you an example of a trigger that I experienced recently. This happens every now and again, and it happened this week. Sometimes you leave your garbage cans on the street too long, and then someone puts their dog's poop bag in your garbage can. Now, you might be out there, and you might say, that's not as big a deal. You might be out there, and you might say, I do that, and, I think it's fine. Look, to each their own. But for whatever reason, for me, when that happens to me, I get very, very upset, as if that person has disrespected me on a fundamental soul level, okay? I don't know why, and certainly I have some work to do in this area, right? But here's what I do know. We can spend our life avoiding all possible triggers in life, right? I could put a sign on the trash can and say, look, I'm watching you, and if I see you do this again, I'm coming after you, right? I could sit outside and wait for the garbage truck to come. And so the minute that my trash has been picked up, I immediately, and I could change my whole schedule to make sure that there's never an opportunity for someone to place a poop bag in my trash can. I could even spend thousands and thousands of dollars to invent a contraption where if someone drops a poop bag into my garbage can unauthorized, it launches back into their face, right? These are all things that I could do, right? Just as you and I have the option to avoid anything that could possibly trigger us. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be expensive. And I think worst of all, it's going to make our world smaller and smaller and smaller. Because if you continue to draw lines around the things that you don't want to experience in life, right? The comfort zone of your life is just going to become smaller and smaller and smaller. And the map, both quite literally the physical map and the emotional map of where you can go in this world, is just going to get smaller. There's an ancient Buddhist parable that I think speaks to this idea very well. And it basically says this: you look out at the world and you recognize that the world has thorns and thistles and jagged rocks. And so walking upon the world certainly promises for some pain. And so you can either do this. You can get enough leather to cover all the world so that walking on it could be painless. Or you have another option. You could just wrap your feet in leather, right? It's much, much simpler. The 20th century Indian sage Ramana Maharshi says, we cannot mend the whole world. If we try to reform the world without reforming ourselves, we cannot succeed. Instead of trying to cover the whole earth with leather to avoid the thorns, it is enough to wear sandals. What are those sandals for you, friends? Maybe it's the inner work, right? Maybe it's the willingness to lean in. Maybe it's the recognition that instead of changing others, we can change ourselves. Again, it all comes down to how we feel about the triggers and the challenges. Ram Dass, who is, a modern teacher of our generation, he would say, that our triggers themselves are the teachers because they show you where you are not yet free. Right? Anytime something comes up that's difficult, it's information. It's like, hey, look, I guess I'm still attached there, right? And so if our goal in life is to experience that complete freedom, then maybe we could start seeing our triggers, which tell us where we're not free, as valuable information. I have a friend who is a therapist in the field called compassionate inquiry, which means to really be compassionate about how we inquire within about what's going on. And he has this simple mantra. He says, anytime a difficult emotion comes up, just say to it, show me, right? What does this mean for me? What is this speaking to? Show me, right? So you get cut off in traffic, right? And if you're like me, you could take that very, very personally, or you could say, show me, right? Maybe you got 30 people who called you on your birthday, and there's one person who didn't call you on your birthday, and that person is all you can think about. And you could just say, what part feels sad right now, right? And you could look into that. And maybe as you watch the news, which I don't recommend, but if you do choose to watch the news, maybe you feel a lot of different emotions and anxiety and grief and things arise. And what if you could say to each of those feelings and emotions, show me, right? Thank you for showing me where I still am holding on. Friends, we can avoid discomfort. We can mask the symptoms, but think of all that we'd be missing along the way. All of that potential for knowing ourselves in a deeper way, right? We could live a life where we never experience growing pains, right? But think about what your life would have looked like all along the way if you had never experienced both the growing pains that you asked for and the ones you didn't, right? If you could meet that version of yourself right now, who every time something painful or challenging came up, you could just, wish it away with a magic wand, right? And then you could meet that version of yourself, right? Who would that person be? And would you, knowing all you know, still choose all of the beauty and all of the pain that happened in your life because it all led you to where you are, right? We learn to lean into it because there's all these gifts for us. And one of the greatest gifts, and this is kind of where we'll close up today, is this idea that was teased in the video from the beginning, this idea of anti-fragility, popularized by an author named Nassim Taleb, who wrote this book, Anti-Fragile. And he basically says there are these three responses to pain and difficulty. The first is to be fragile, which means we break under stress. And we all have areas of our lives where we are fragile, right? If something goes wrong for me in an area where I have zero knowledge or understanding, I tend to have a hard time, right? Like knock on wood, because I don't want to be inviting anything into my life. But if anything ever goes wrong with my car, I do not know cars very well, and I'm very fragile, and I break under the stress of that, right? But then beyond fragility, there is resilience, right? Or as was talked about today, resilience 1.0. And it's this idea that when something stressful or difficult happens, we can endure through that experience, and ultimately, right, through the tools and resources that we have, we can return to the state of being that we once occupied, right? We can move through a difficult experience and sort of move on, right? But then there is this third response, anti-fragility, also known as resilience 2.0. And in anti-fragility, the thing that is stressful, the thing that is uncomfortable, the thing that is painful actually in some way fuels your fire, because from it you grow. From it you learn. From it you integrate, and you are a wiser, more transformed person than you were before. And so every time that you and I choose to lean in instead of turn away from our challenges, we work on this anti-fragility. Our inner fire grows. And on this idea of the inner fire, Nassim Taleb says, look, wind extinguishes a candle, but it energizes fire, right? They're the same thing, but at different sizes, the reaction to this disruption is completely different. Friends, when you increase the tools in your spiritual tool belt, when you increase the resources you have, when you lean into community, when you do that inner work, right, you fan the flame so that even when the winds of life blow, maybe they make you stronger, right? Instead of just saying, I can make it through this, you say, here I am, right? I am ready, right? And I will allow this to teach me what it needs to teach me. So friends, right, we all are going to go through growing pains. And for all of us, I wonder, where are we being invited in this time of our lives, right? And perhaps you're in a season of growing pains, and at least we all know some area of our life where we feel challenged and uncomfortable. Where are you being invited to move from fragile to resilient to anti-fragile? Where are you invited to lean in instead of turn away? And I understand that throughout this conversation, perhaps some things have been coming up for you, right? Maybe the very thing that you need to look at instead of turn away from, and yet it can be uncomfortable to do that. So maybe even in the midst of this gathering today, you're like, well, it wants to come up. No, I don't want it to come up, right? And you're playing whack-a-mole in your heart of the different things that want to be known. And so I just want to encourage us. Let's just take 1 minute and let's just breathe together mindfully, right? Don't be like me when I'm 5 years old and freak out about it, but just breathe mindfully for a moment. And whatever comes up for you, just allow it to come up. And maybe you say something like, show me, okay? Show me. Show me. Show me. And may I have the courage to lean into this feeling, to be curious, to be open, and to allow it to speak to me as a messenger from soul.